Want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humongous. This week we are one step closer to a banana republic. We are one step closer to a crony kleptocracy run by a tin pot dictator. On the week of February 17th, the president replaced the director of national intelligence with a sycophant, a Trump fan with no intelligence experience, a Trumper dedicated to proving Donald Trump's conspiracy theories and to silencing intelligence on Russia's efforts to throw our elections to Donald Trump. But that's not all. The president pardoned or commuted the sentences of 11 people on February 18th. He pardoned 4 rich white men, 3 not-so-rich white men, 3 minority women who were serving long sentences for drug offenses, and 1 woman who had helped engineer a $205 million Medicare fraud. The reaction to this executive clemency was not what you would expect. Normally, when Trump does something that makes headlines, Democrats dump on him and Republicans rush to his defense. But not this time. At least not when it comes to the most prominent act of clemency in the batch: the commutation of sentence of former Democratic governor of Illinois, Rod Blagojevich. The Washington Examiner, a conservative newspaper that normally supports President Trump to the hilt, says that, quote, by commuting the sentence of Rod Blagojevich, President Trump has boosted one of the mosquito-like corrupt officials who suck the blood out of democracy. Then the Examiner's verdict gets even harsher. It says Trump's action doesn't simply fuel the swamp, it floods it with gallons of festering water and a banqueting invitation to the mosquito corruption clique. The Examiner sheds light on one motive for the Blagojevich pardon when it quotes the president saying that the Blagojevich prosecution came from the same people who led the Russia investigation into the Trump campaign, James Comey and Patrick Fitzgerald. The Examiner explains that, quote, Trump's not so helpful to himself implication is that he and Blagojevich are victims of the same conspiracy. And the Examiner comes to a disturbing conclusion: that President, quote, Trump shows that he doesn't think that public corruption is that big a deal, close quote. Let me repeat. The Washington Examiner, a pro-Trump newspaper, says that President Donald Trump shows that he doesn't think that public corruption is that big a deal. And the Examiner is not alone in that conclusion. On Fox News Channel's The Five, a show that also normally leaps to President Trump's defense, Dana Perino, host of Fox's Daily Briefing, added that Governor Blagojevich's crimes were, quote, the very definition of the swamp. Perino pointed to Blagojevich withholding government aid to a children's hospital until its CEO coughed up a campaign contribution. Perino called this extortion, and Fox News' Jesse Waters pointed out that Blagojevich was on Celebrity Apprentice. Actually, Blagojevich was on Celebrity Apprentice 4 times. Everybody knows, explained Waters, that the pardon is probably because of, quote, a personal connection, close quote. In other words, this pardon was cronyism. Cronyism, pure and simple. But it's the folks in Blagojevich's home territory, Illinois, the state where Blagojevich was governor, who complained the most. And many of those complaining in the media were Republicans. Why? Because the Chicago Tribune says the citizens of Illinois were, quote, 12 million victims of Illinois corruption, close quote. And a good deal of that corruption was perpetrated by Governor Rod Blagojevich. 4 Illinois Republican representatives, yes, 4 Republicans, issued a statement saying that they, quote, are disappointed by the president's commutation of Rod Blagojevich's federal sentence. Blagojevich, said the 4 Republican reps, is the very face of public corruption in Illinois, and not once has he shown any remorse for his clear and documented record of egregious crimes. The 4 Republican reps emphasized that, quote, as our state continues to grapple with political corruption, We shouldn't let those who breach the public trust off the hook. Illinois Republican Chairman Tim Schneider, yes, the state's Republican Party chairman, pronounced some of the most vehement words on the subject. He said, quote, "In a state where corrupt, machine-style politics is still all too common, it's important that those found guilty serve their prison sentence in its entirety." Schneider concluded that, quote, "the former governor's proven record of corruption is a stain upon Illinois and its citizens. We must stand up and send the message that corruption will not be tolerated in Illinois." But as the Republican leaders of Illinois could clearly see, the president is sending the message that corruption in politics is perfectly fine. Why that message? Because Blagojevich's corruption is the kind of corruption that Donald Trump feels is his own privilege and prerogative as president. Again, Blagojevich withheld government-mandated aid to a children's hospital until the hospital's head coughed up a campaign contribution. Does that remind you of Donald Trump holding back $391 million worth of congressionally required defense aid until Ukraine's president would call CNN to announce an investigation of Hunter and Joe Biden? It should. It's what Fox News' Dana Perino calls extortion, a tool Donald Trump used with Ukraine's president. Trump not only held up the $391 million, but he promised the Ukraine's new president at White House meeting, then he dangled it like bait. That meeting was designed to show the Russians that Zelensky had America's back, and America's backing was crucial. Why? Because Russia seized the Crimean Peninsula and its port of Sebastopol from Ukraine in 2014 and declared them parts of Russia. And because for 6 years, Russia's irregular troops, its little green men, have been making war in Ukraine's Donbass region, encouraging the Donbass's Russian-speaking citizens to declare independence from Ukraine, to call themselves people's republics, and to make themselves satellites of Russia. That war in Donbass is still going on while you're watching this episode of Want to Know Why? Ask How. A White House meeting signaling that America has Ukraine's back would make a big difference. But that meeting never happened. Why? Because Zelensky ran on an anti-corruption platform. He promised he would flush the corruption out of the Ukrainian political system, and he refused a corrupt deal imposed on him by, of all people, the President of the United States, which means that the failure to have that White House meeting showed the Russians that, in fact, Zelensky does not have the backing of your president and mine, and that Vladimir Putin can do anything he wants with Ukraine and get away with it. The president sent another signal to Vladimir Putin the week of February 17th when he blew up at his director of national intelligence for letting congressmen and women like Adam Schiff know that Russia is already meddling in the 2020 election, and that Russia is once again trying to elect, guess who? Donald Trump. The president fired the director of national intelligence responsible for letting this information slip. The message to Trump's fanboy hero, Vladimir Putin, is that as long as you meddle to elect me, keep up the good work. The founding fathers who felt that foreign meddling in our elections would shred the Constitution and destroy the Republic must be grimacing in their graves. But let's give credit where credit is due. President Trump announced 2 seemingly generous pardons. Pardons to minority women in jail for over 10 years each for nonviolent drug crimes. 2 women who had become model prisoners and had done generous deeds like volunteering for a hospice and leading educational programs for other prisoners. But even these pardons were less open-hearted than they seemed. They were part of a move Trump revealed in his February 4th State of the Union speech, Trump's bid for minority votes. Look, most of the men Trump pardoned were friends of friends, particularly friends of Rudolph Giuliani, and friends of big-time campaign contributors like Nelson Peltz, a billionaire investor who hosted a $10 million fundraiser for the president's 2020 campaign. That $10 million fundraiser took place 3 days before the pardons were announced. In other words, the folks Trump pardoned were cronies, or potential cronies. They were the sort of folks Donald Trump likes to hang out with. For example, one was a former billionaire owner of the San Francisco 49ers. And they were folks who had committed the sort of white-collar crimes that Donald Trump does not regard as crimes at all. For example, hiding their incomes from the government and cheating on their taxes, the sort of crimes Donald Trump appears to have committed. After all, if you are rich and white, your crimes are not really crimes. You are what Trump calls a very nice person, and you don't belong in jail, right? And the pardons drove home another message. Praise Trump. Please him or his friends, and you will be rewarded. Go against the Mafia Don, I meant the Donald, and as Trump puts it, you will go through some things. Jeffrey Toobin of The New Yorker says these pardons are moving our system closer to a cult of personality. Toobin explains that the point of authoritarianism is to concentrate power in the ruler, so the world knows that all actions, good and bad, harsh and generous, come from a single source. Remember, Joseph Stalin and Kim Jong-un of North Korea advertised their fatherly generosity, not their mass murders. Meanwhile, according to Andrew McCarthy, a former federal prosecutor and a commentator for Fox News, the president is trying to turn the tables and investigate the investigators. This would be another move to show that those who go against the Donald will be punished, which means that when 52 Republican senators absolved Donald Trump of the abuse of power and obstruction of Congress charges for which the House of Representatives had impeached Trump, those senators removed the biggest tool provided in the Constitution to check an out-of-control president. If Trump investigates the investigators, he will remove another tool. He will undo another check in the system of checks and balances, and we will be one step closer to a dictatorship. To see if Donald Trump can pull off his banana republicanization of the United States of America, stay tuned for upcoming episodes of Wanna Know Why? Ask How. And now for that furiously infernal, sneaky, and sleazy little off button. I think I got it.